Suicide Zen Forgiveness, the pod that shares the stories of those affected by suicide. Lost a loved one? Attempted it yourself? Did you know that when you share a burden, the load is lightened? Come listen in with your host, Elaine Lindsay.
Suicide Zen Forgiveness, the podcast, is for education only. Some of the subject matter could be triggering for those that are newly grieving or in a poor state of mental health. Please call your local suicide hotline or mental health office if you need immediate help.
Come listen in with your host, Elaine Lindsay.
My guest today is Michelle Swartz. She's a widowed mom of 5 living in Calgary, Alberta. Michelle was born in Ontario, Canada, and moved to Alberta when she was 13. Michelle studied professional cooking and worked in catering for many years. She then changed careers and went into banking. Michelle married her husband Anthony in 2008 and started their family. Michelle became a widow in 2019 when her husband died by suicide. Michelle is the co-host of the I Did Not Sign Up for This podcast, and I'm honored to have her as my guest. And without further ado, I'd love for you to welcome my guest, Michelle.
Hello.
Hello, and thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and share your story with us.
Of course. I'm always happy to share.
Well, I think it's important, and as I always say, sharing our story helps us lighten our burden, but more than that, it helps others know that they're not alone.
Absolutely.
And that's really kind of where we want to go. But I really like to let my guests divulge their story in the way that's most comfortable for them. And you are a busy mom. I have no other way to say other than a lot of children.
A lot of children, yes.
Yeah. I honestly believe with 2, I have a lot of children. So, that's definitely more than me. But I think start where you want to start, because I think that's most pertinent for you.
Okay. I will say, I always say this to people because they're like, oh, you have 5, like I have nothing to complain about. And I always say, even having 1 is hard. Like it's not an easy job, no matter how many you have. There's always challenges that come with raising children. So it's, we're all kind of in it together, right? So
they don't come with a manual. You're absolutely correct.
They do not. And my oldest is 13 and my youngest, I have twins and they're 6. And, the teenager every day, there's something new. There's some drama going on. And same with the 6-year-olds, right? It's just like, as soon as I have one figured out, the other ones there's some drama going on. So it's just ongoing.
Well, and in a way, I think it's kind of interesting because, I'm in a position in my life now where I'm a grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and as grandma, I have one that's 16 driving, and one that's 28.
Okay.
I have one that's 13. One just turned 9, and the youngest literally just turned 6.
Okay.
So I totally get where you're coming from.
Yes.
The drama. As much as it's all drama, it's all different.
It is. Yeah, it
is. Age is different for sure.
It is. And yeah, it definitely keeps me on my toes, but I'm very thankful for them for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I guess I'll just give you kind of a little synopsis of the beginning and then go from there.
Sounds good.
I was actually born and raised in Ontario, in Sarnia. Had a pretty typical childhood, and my dad was transferred to Calgary for work. He worked in the oil field, in the oil industry, and oil and gas, and in HR. And so then we all moved here. And that, of course, is difficult when you're 13 and you're starting, all over basically. And you've had all these friends since you were in kindergarten, right? So that was definitely an adjustment. I remember we moved in the summer, and I remember crying in my bed every night, just because, especially in the summer, you're not meeting new people or anything, right?
Oh
Until you
no,
get to
what
school.
a difficult transition, and at that age too.
Yes.
Wow.
But I would say I'm fairly outgoing, so I made friends pretty quickly and made it through junior high, and then went into high school, and was a big drama nerd. That's where I met my best friend Carling. We were in dramas together and things like that. And then I met this group of boys, and they were all silly and goofy and funny and cute. And, kind of when you become this group in high school, there's always dating and like all those things, right? And I like him. Well, I liked him first, and blah, blah, blah. But I met this guy named Anthony, and he was the sweetest, nicest boy. And I just instantly fell in love. And I remember I was actually dating one of the other guys at the time, but I went back home to Ontario, and I remember talking to my grandma, and I was showing her pictures of, my new friends. And I showed her a picture of my boyfriend. I was like, this is the guy I'm dating. I was like, but this is the guy I'm going to marry. And so that was Anthony. And so we became best friends pretty quickly. We were probably the only two in our group that actually went to church and things like that. We were Catholic. And so we kind of bonded over that, and we just had the same sense of humor, and we were very flirty and, teased each other and things like that. So we kind of went all through high school with just being really like best friends, but never dating. And then after high school, we would, make out every once in a while and do those kind of things. But we didn't start dating until his dad had actually died. And his dad did die by suicide. And that was a big turning point in his life for sure. He very much pushed away a lot of people in his life, a lot of friends, but I was always there, and he always wanted me to be there, which just felt nice. I just wanted to be there. And this was the first time anything like this had ever happened to either of us, to experience a parent dying was huge. And his parents weren't together at the time, but he still had a relationship with his dad, and they would go to church together, they would go to movies together and things like that. So it was very shocking and traumatic. And so we were about 21 or so when that happened. And so we started dating, and we dated for a year, and just had so much fun together, and we were always best friends. We could always make each other laugh and things like that. And then he decided to take a big trip to Australia and New Zealand. And when he came back, he wanted to break up. He kind of had a feeling while he was over there that he didn't want to get married, anytime soon, and he didn't want to have kids anytime soon. And that obviously was kind of the direction we were going in. But we were still young, but of course we were Catholic. And so that's kind of the natural progression of it all. And so we broke up, and I was devastated, because not only was he, my boyfriend, but he was my best friend, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, my children are doing, you can probably hear that. Anyway, so that was really hard. And so I kind of threw myself into work. I got a second job. I didn't make myself available to him ever. Like, I was just like, fine, like, we're done, right? Sorry, 1 second. So that was really hard. But then of course we would find each other again, and we still loved each other. Like, we still cared about each other, and we would still see each other all the time, and act like we were dating, basically. So probably a year. And I dated some people, and he actually, I don't know if he dated anybody, but anyways, but I was working a lot, and I knew that bothered him because he could never just like call me and me would be there for him. Right. So
right.
kind of played a little hard to get for a while there.
Way to go.
Right. But a year went by, and I had moved out of my parents' house, and I had bought a condo, and I was living very independently, and just kind of, still had him as my best friend, but just whatever. But he had kind of said to me one day, right after I moved, he was like, I think we should get back together. And of course, I was always like, yeah, like,
yeah.
Like I said, I was going to marry you when I was 16.
I knew it. Yeah,
right.
What's wrong with you?
Right. And he said, but I don't want to just date. I want to get married. And I was like, okay. So I don't know if it was the same day or a couple of days later, we went and talked to our parents, and it was like, surprise, we're getting married. Like you didn't even think we were dating, but like, this is now happening. Right. So, but they all knew that we were each other's person. Right. So, we got married 9 months later, and then 9 months after that, we had our first baby. We moved very quickly. We both wanted kids right away, and we both wanted big families. I only have a brother, and he only had a brother, and so we just wanted we always talked about how much we want to grow up together. And my husband was a big kid, right? So he just always wanted to have
lots
a plane. Yeah. So exactly. So we had our first, and when our first was about a year, we got pregnant again. Unfortunately, we lost that pregnancy at about 16 weeks. Difficult, and kind of our first major,
very
hurdle,
hard.
right? And very hard, and not something that we expected, especially because once you get past that 12-week mark, you're like, okay, we're good, right? And you don't really think about like other things can happen. And so that was a very big shock. And so, but he was always just there. He could calm me down in any moment. He could make me laugh in any moment, whether it was appropriate or not. He could always just make me feel better. And I'm a much different person now than I was then, but I was always very, I could be quick to temper. I could be quick to be annoyed. I could very easily, be frustrated. And he always just knew how to, and he was a very even-keeled, calm person. It took him a lot to get to the point where he was upset. And so, we definitely balanced each other out, because I would kind of bring him out of his shell a little bit, and he would kind of put me in my place a little bit. And, because I would say I was the more outgoing one.
More volatile, maybe?
I would say so, definitely. Yeah. And especially, it was hard because I, a lot of the time, was either pregnant or breastfeeding. And so the hormones, are just insane, right? And so for 8 years, I didn't feel like myself.
Right.
I felt like affect your partner when they don't know what you're thinking, or you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And so it was hard. It was hard because he had time when I was pregnant, and I get it. I didn't like who I was a lot of the time because I things like that. And now that I have the perspective that I have, I hate that I was like that, because for me, it's like, it's just, none of it matters, none of it matters. So we lost our baby, but then we got pregnant again, and we had a little girl. And then after that, when she was about a year, we got pregnant again, lost that pregnancy, and got pregnant again and lost that pregnancy. That was pretty traumatic. I had a little bit of like bleeding the day before, and then was like, well, I'll just go to my midwife. Like, I'm sure everything's fine. And you kind of go on Facebook and you talk to other people, and they're like, oh, that happened to me and everything was fine. That happened to me and everything was fine. But then you kind of feel deep down like, I don't think I'm going to be fine. Like I don't think my end result is going to be okay. Um, and so that night I woke up and I was basically like a movie, in the bathroom, and then fainted and had to phone the ambulance and had to go to the hospital and have emergency surgery. Um, and that was really hard. And at that time, I I lost a lot of blood. I needed a transfusion, and then I needed to be on iron pills after that. And my energy level was so low. I could be good until about 10 or 11 and at a.m. And then after that, it was just like I had nothing left to give. We had just moved. I had 2 little kids. And not only did I feel defeated physically, but I felt defeated mentally, because I'm thinking, why can't I have any more babies? Like we always wanted a big family, and I don't understand what's wrong with me. And I can have kids, so like, why isn't this working? And it's so frustrating, and you just ask yourself all these questions, and you get angry when you see other pregnant people, and you wonder why it's working for them and not working for you, and you just become really irrational in your thinking, and yeah, it's really difficult. So we kept trying, and so I did get pregnant again, with our third, who was a little girl. And my husband, I stayed home full time. My husband worked as a taper and a drywaller, and he had his own company, and he loved what he did. He was very good at what he did, and was very, he was a perfectionist. And it's hard to find reliable people in the construction field, right? So all of but for him, like, his motivation was us. His motivation to keep going and to keep showing up was his family. So he just would take every job, and a lot of jobs he got was from word of mouth, because he did such a good job. And so we got pregnant again, and this time around it was crazy. I had gone for a dating ultrasound, and I joked with him the night before. I said, "What are you going to do if I call you and it's twins?" Because he didn't come with me, because I was like, it's just a dating ultrasound, and he had to work out of town. So I'm like, it's not a big deal. But it kind of was.
It kind of became a big deal.
Yeah. So I remember, getting the ultrasound, and then I could see, because I've had so many ultrasounds, I could see 2 like definitive sacs, and I was like, oh my. But nobody was saying anything. They weren't, and it was a student, right? So she wasn't saying anything, but I could see what was going on. And so then the teacher came in, and he was like, okay, yeah, you just labeled that one A and that one B. And I was like, is it twins? And he's like, oh yeah, she didn't tell you. And I was like, no. Like, so it was just insane. I mean, to have 3, and my youngest was not even 2. And then to know that you're, almost doubling your family, like, it's just insane. And so I phoned him, and the first thing I said was, are you okay? Because he had said, when I had asked him, what if I call you and tell you it's twins? And he's like, I'll just laugh. And so when I called him, I said, are you ready to laugh? And he was like, no. You're kidding. And I was like, I am not kidding. So that was crazy. But yeah, just had a pretty typical pregnancy with the twins. He was still working. I was still at home. My kids some of them were going to school. Some of them were in playgroup, daycare, or not daycare, but like preschool, things like that.
Yes.
And I had to have them be a C-section because they were both breech. So he took some time off so that we could all be at home together, and he could help out, and all the things that you have to do after major surgery. And we were just good. Like, we felt good, and he was working, we were doing okay. We had financial issues here and there because, of
Sure.
course, it was just him working.
And you had 5 children.
Exactly. And a lot of the pressure was on him. And so those things, I think they're being talked about more. But at the time, it wasn't talked about that men could struggle.
Yes.
And you have 5 children and you need to work. And that's just what you have to do.
Yep.
And whether you're okay mentally or physically doesn't really matter. You just have to work, because if you don't, the snowball effect happens, right? And everything just goes downhill. So we had decided to sell the house that we were living in, and we wanted to move to an acreage, and we wanted to move to a place that was a little bit more affordable and where he could still work. And so we decided to move about an hour and a half away from where we were, where all of our family and support was. And everybody thought we were crazy because we were literally moving to the middle of nowhere. We were about 20 minutes from a town. But it was what we always wanted. We always wanted to live on an acreage and have our kids run around and, do all that kind of stuff. So it was really a dream, and it was really a dream for him too. But so we moved there when our twins were about 1.5 years. And it was a beautiful place. It had a beautiful tree-lined, like long driveway and a gorgeous red barn at the end, and just a dream place. And the house was nothing to write home about. It was an old farmhouse, right? But it was just, my husband had big plans. He was always thinking about how he could renovate or make things nicer, or he just always had plans. So we settled in there, but he was still working in Calgary. That's where we were living before. And so he was commuting back and forth. And he was trying to get work in the town. So the town that we had moved to just outside of was Drumheller. And he was trying to get work there, but the economy in Drumheller wasn't great. There wasn't a lot of things being built. There wasn't a lot of growth happening. And he had so many connections and ties in Calgary. Right? Like he didn't want to say no to any work. And I would say in our relationship, when it comes to being responsible or not being responsible with money, he was the more responsible one and I was the more irresponsible one. I would buy things for the kids all the time. I would buy them clothes all the time. Like, I very much have always been, I see it, I want it, I have to have it, And he was very much, I see it, I want it, I'm going to think about it for 2 weeks and, calculate all of my choices. Exactly. And research if this is the right thing and the right product and the right time to buy and the right price. And I was just like, well, I just want it, so I'm just going to get it, And so we always battled over things like that. We would always argue about money and spending money and things like that. And I thought he was too cheap and he thought I was too impulsive. And that was hard. But I would say that we probably got ourselves into financial trouble when it came to the business because we weren't properly setting money aside, filing our taxes on time. And he had a very hard time with those kind of things, with the paperwork, with the, and I wanted to help, but I also at the time didn't realize, but diagnosed recently, have ADHD. And so I'm not great with organizing things or sitting down and, focusing and things like that. So we didn't make a great pair when it came to like the paperwork and the bookwork, right?
And like so many couples.
Oh yeah.
Let me just say that.
Well, and it's such a huge monster when you're starting your own business. There's so many things that you don't know when it comes to taxes and the government and federal taxes and provincial taxes and licensing and all of these things. And all he wanted to do was work. He just wanted to keep working. So the stress would get more and more and more, and that was hard. So, so, yeah, it was great where we were, but his commute, and he would stay in Calgary because we had, instead of selling the house that we had been living in, we were renting it out. And so he kept the basement and he would stay in the basement when he was there. And he would go back and forth and be home for a few days and away for a few days. And it was working, but it was difficult. You know, I was home by myself with 5 children in the middle of nowhere. He was in Calgary by himself. You know, he felt lonely, and that definitely took a toll on his mental health for sure. I knew how happy he was when he was home, because all he wanted was to be home with us.
Yeah.
All he wanted was to make enough money so that he could be home with us. And so he just kept trying to make more and more, but he felt like it was never enough. It was never enough for him to take a break. And the work is there, so I need to keep working. I need to keep working. And if I don't keep working, you know, what are we going to do? Right? So that stress was huge. And he didn't let me in on a lot of it because he didn't want to worry me.
No, because he was a man.
And so he kept a lot of it in and wouldn't share with me how he was feeling or how stressed out he was.
Because he loved you.
Yeah. And I appreciate that, but it's also like, I want to help. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want you to feel this way. Like, we can figure this out. So that was really hard. And so one day he was working in Calgary, and he would usually call me at like 9 o'clock or so to say goodnight or to talk to me about the day or how the kids were doing. And he didn't call. So I called him, and his phone went right to voicemail. And in my mind, if I phone you and your phone goes to voicemail, you're dead. Like, no matter who you are. Like, that's just the way my mind works.
Okay.
Because I never turn my phone off ever. Right. And so that's just, I go to like worst case scenario. Right. And so I'm calling, and I'm calling our friends and our family to say, like, can you drive by the house to see if his truck is there? Can you drive by the movie theater? Because he will go to a lot of movies by himself.
Right.
But he would always text me ahead of time to say, like, hey, I'm going into a movie. I won't be able to text you for a couple hours. Right. But he would always let me know that. And nothing. And somehow I went to bed that night not knowing where he was or what he was doing. But I was able to, on my phone, see his location occasionally because we shared a Google email.
Yes.
And so I could see where his phone was pinging. And as I'm looking, he's in the States. And I'm like, what? Like, what? And so in my mind, the most logical thing that had happened was he was kidnapped and somebody was taking him somewhere, because there was no part of me that thought he was willingly leaving.
Yeah.
Willingly going somewhere away from us. And so I could follow along a little bit for a day or so. And then he realized that I could, and he turned it off. And by the next day, I had phoned the police and let them know and all these things. And they were able to tell me that he had crossed the border by himself. You know, they couldn't see anybody in the vehicle. He had his passport and everything. And I'm just spiraling, thinking, like, what is going on? Like, where are you going? What are you doing? Like, what is happening? I was phoning his coworkers and his boss to say, like, did something happen? Like, how was he this day? Like, what was going on? And they didn't know. So this went on for 3 weeks. Almost 3 weeks. Yeah. Of me not knowing where he was, if he was dead or alive. The only thing that I could hold on to was that he was checking his emails, and I could see that because we shared an email. So every time I sent one, I could see whether it was read or not.
Right.
And so I just kept sending them and kept sending them. And they would go from, what the hell are you doing, to like, please come back. Like, everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And then I just got to the point where I was like, what would I be sending him if he was out of town or whatever? And I would send him pictures of the kids. So I just kept sending him pictures of the kids every day of what we were doing and what was going on. And I just wanted him to keep seeing those.
Seeing them. Yeah.
And I would beg him to go talk to somebody. I would say, just go to a church and talk to a priest or something, right? Like, just talk to somebody, because I had kind of resigned myself to the thought that he was going to die, that he was planning something, and that's why he was there. Because there was no other explanation in my mind. Like, you're not starting a new life. Like, what are you doing, right? And I was able to see that he had gone to like a sporting goods store and a Walmart or something. And when I had seen that, I knew that he was buying a generator. I just knew that that's what he was doing. We had watched 48 Hours a couple months before, where, I don't know if you remember the case of like Conrad and Michelle, and she had convinced him to end his life. And it was like, it's like a big news thing. And she ended up going to jail because they determined that, she was guilty.
She was a catalyst.
Yeah. And so we watched that. And I remember he died by putting a generator in the back of the truck. And I remember my husband asking me, how long do you think that would take? And at the time I was like, well, I don't know. Like, it didn't even faze me as a question. Right. But then immediately I flashed back to that and thought, that's what he's going to do. So about 3 weeks went by. This was over Thanksgiving as well. And I had his brother out, his sister-in-law and his mom and my parents, and they were at my place like on and off. So I was never by myself. But then I got an email from him saying that he was coming back.
Oh.
And I was like, okay. Okay. I didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And so everybody left because they didn't really know what they were worried that if he showed up and saw the cars and everything, everybody would leave again. Right. But in his mind, he was expecting to come back and everybody be there, including the police. And he thought that he would be taken to like the hospital or something. Because his brother, a few years before this, had also left. He was gone for about a week. And when he came back, he was taken to the hospital. But it was because at the time he had been talking about suicide. And so he was a threat to himself or others. And so the police were involved. But in our situation, even though I knew that that's what he was doing and that's what he was planning, he never expressed that. He never said that in emails. He just said that he needed a break and he was fine. So there was never enough information to say to the police, like, he's in danger.
Nothing overt.
Yeah. So he came home. It was awkward because the kids were excited to see him because they thought he was just working.
Yeah.
I'm like shocked, right? I didn't know what to do, what to say.
No.
He said, he was like, I was expecting there to be people here, police here, something. And I was like, but you never indicated that you were going to do something. Like, they couldn't, they weren't just going to, and he was like, well, I think I need to go to the hospital. And me thinking like, dude, I'm not letting you out of my sight ever again. Like, this is not going to happen. And anyways, I just had to let him go because all my kids were sleeping and he needed to go to the hospital. And I was like, okay, like, you're going to have to do that. And so he went to the hospital and stayed overnight and talked to some mental health, people in the morning.
Right.
And they had said, here's some resources, here's some free counseling, things like that, credit counseling, because at the time we, were struggling financially. And we kind of had decided like, okay, we're going to fix this. Like, we're going to figure this out. And so for about a week, he was home and I was home, and I would ask him, I started asking him, like, are you okay? And he's like, I can't answer that question. Like, I just can't. And I was like, okay, so can you tell me on a scale of 1 to 10, like how you're feeling?
Right.
1 being totally fine, 10 being I need to go to the hospital. And so he would say, 4, 5, like, so just I could kind of get a gauge of like how he was doing mentally.
Right.
And at the same time, we were going to like meetings and counseling and things like that. And this was just in the span of a week. So then on the Friday, I asked him in the morning after our kids went to school, I said, what number are you? And he said, I'm a 9. And I said, okay, we're going to the hospital. So I loaded my 3 other kids in the car with him and drove him to the hospital. And we were waiting. And of course, I'm there with 2 1.5-year-olds and a 3-year-old. And I was like, okay, he had been taken back. And I was like, I'm going to go bring the kids home. Your mom is going to meet me, and then I will come back.
Right.
And as I'm driving home, he calls me and he says they want me to go to Ponoka. And Ponoka is a town, and they have a mental health facility out there.
Yes.
And I was like, okay, like, okay. I didn't know what to say.
Yeah.
And so I was like, all right. And I got home and I broke down. And then I gave the kids to my mother-in-law, turned around, went to Walmart, picked him up a bunch of things that he could bring with him, like pajama pants and things like that.
Yeah.
And it was Halloween that day. So I went and got my kids during lunch from the school, and the school and the hospital were like literally across the street from each other. So I went and got them and brought them to the hospital to say bye to Dad. And he went to the hospital, and he was there altogether about 3 weeks.
Yeah.
He was very up and down. They didn't really know what to do with him because they didn't know how to diagnose him. They felt like a lot of it was diminished. Like they would say, like, I don't really understand why you're depressed. Like, you have a wife and 5 kids and like you have a job, and I don't really understand, why you're feeling the way you're feeling. And he's like, okay, but I am. So like,
yeah, what difference does it make whether
Yeah.
you understand it or not? That's how he's feeling.
So then he felt like, should I really be here? Like, why am I feeling, so they would try different medications and things like that. And he was able to come home on like a weekend pass and stuff like that. But I had found out later that when he went back, when he was driving back, he wanted to drive into a telephone pole. And so he had told the counselor that, and the therapist that, and of course they changed his medication again and things like that. And so it was very rocky for those 3 weeks. But in the end, he came out and he had a plan. He had a safety plan. He had a plan to see a therapist. He had medication, things like that. He also had, like, I think it was Ativan. Is that the one that you take when you're like feeling out of control? And it, yeah.
Yes.
He had to take that a few times because he would just start spiraling and hyperventilating and things like that. And so he was doing counseling. I was doing counseling. We were doing couples counseling. And all through this, I'm lost. I'm like, what is my place? Because when he came out of the hospital, he was very depressed. He would sleep all the time, couldn't get him out of bed. And I'm thinking, like, what do I do? Do I push him and tell him to get out of bed and do a routine, or do I leave him? Like, what's my place, and what is going to make it worse, and what is going to make it better?
Yeah.
And I didn't know. Like, I had no idea. And I'm like, nobody prepares you for this kind of stuff. Like,
there's no handbook.
Yeah, no.
Something that's really important.
Mm-hmm.
You were also managing 5 children.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
My heart goes out to you. My heart goes out to him because there is
Mhm.
nothing worse than struggling with your mental health. I totally get
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah.
But also you to have the weight
Hmm.
of the whole your world on your
Yeah.
shoulders.
Yeah. It's when I look back on it, and I really wonder how I survived it. I really do. Because it.
You are a survivor. That's how.
Thank you. It's hard, and so a couple months were going by, and things were, counseling was going well and things like that, and we had talked about, because he kind of, his therapist and stuff in the hospital had said, maybe um, you guys should separate, like temporarily separate. And I understood why they said that, because I think for them, his stress came from having a family and working and not being able to provide. And I understand that suggesting that makes sense, kind of take the stress away so that you can deal with your mental health.
Concentrate on himself. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but he never wanted to do that. I would say, like, should we do this? Like, I don't know how it would work logistically. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But like, for your mental health, because I always said, I would rather you be here for our children and us not be together than you not be here at all.
Yeah.
So I would say, like, should we do that? And he would always say, like, I don't want to. Like, you're the only person who understands me. You're the only person who I can, connect with. And I feel differently when I'm around you. And, I always feel weird talking about that because, it's like only coming from me, like, you know what I mean? But
But you were his person and he was yours.
yeah, yeah. And so, um, yeah, I just didn't know what to do. I just really didn't know where my place was. But he started working a little bit here and there. He was working at my parents' house, kind of doing something with their ceiling. And so that was kind of like getting him back in the groove of
Right.
going back to work and figuring this out. And he went to therapy and had said again how he had felt like he wanted to hurt himself. And so his doctor said, you need to go to the hospital. And he ended up going to a different hospital in the city, and it did not help. It was very much like, okay, here's a book that you should read, goodbye, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I know for him, he had said, like, how long are people going to put up with me like this? And so I think that next hospital stay was kind of the catalyst, because in his mind, he has to work, he has to provide. He can't keep going back into the hospital. He can't keep doing this because he has to work and he has to provide. And I just wish that I could have made him not feel that way. But I didn't know how, because he did need to work and provide. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
how can you take care of both things? It's impossible. And how can you be a husband and feel
And a
this way?
father and a
And
person. And yes.
and of course you're going to feel this way, because when you are the only one working and you were the only one who's bringing in the money, and they say money isn't everything, it is when you need to support your family.
Yeah.
And when you can't do that, then what are you supposed to do? And so that was the end of February. It's actually my birthday. And so he came home, and everything, we spent the weekend together. He was home, and the kids and him had a big snowball fight, and we played all weekend and had fun, and him and I watched a movie, and everything was good. And on Monday, I knew that he was going back to, he had been staying with his mom anytime he was in the city, not staying alone. And I knew that he was going to go do a job. And so he went to his mom's on Monday, and that was fine. We talked that night, and we were chatting, and he was joking that his mom beat him in a game or whatever. And Then the next day I had to bring my kids to an eye doctor appointment, but I couldn't get a hold of him. And I remember earlier that day, he texted me and said, do you need me home for anything in particular this week? Because if there were appointments or whatever, he would work his schedule around, whether he needed to be home or not. And when he had gone missing previously, the same day, he asked me the same question.
Oh.
And and that morning, so I know this happens a lot where things seem to be going well.
Yes.
I kind of in my head, I was kind of reevaluating the last couple months, and I thought, because that was October when he went missing, and this was now March. So we were, 5 months or so. So I was like, okay, it's been 5 months. Things seem to be going pretty well. Like he's going back to work and things seem to be on the right track. And I was talking about going back to work in the fall. I could be a bus driver or something because I could bring my kids with me. And so I was like, okay, things seem to be going better. And then immediately my next thought was he's going to die. And it was just like immediate. And so that whole day I felt really sick, like physically sick to my stomach. And I couldn't get a hold of him. And I was texting his mom and I kept, saying to myself, like, it's fine. He's at work. He's driving. He's busy. He's whatever. Right. And then it kind of got to like dinner time and I was texting his mom and said, like, is he back yet? And she's like, no, but I'll let you know. And so I went on the Find My Phone app.
Yeah.
And I was able to pinpoint where he was. And I sent the location to his cousin. And at the time I was just like, can you just go like see like what if you can find him?
Yeah.
Never expecting that she would find him dead. And so she drove to where the truck was and I phoned her back and I couldn't get through to her phone. Kept saying like it was out of service for some reason. I'm like, what's going on? And then she finally phoned me back and she said, he's gone.
He's gone.
And so I guess at the time the police had like blocked her phone or something so that she couldn't when after they had shown up. And I was sitting in my room and I just lost it. And all my kids came in and they asked me what was wrong. And I just said, Daddy died. Because I didn't know what else to say.
Yeah.
And it was just awful. I mean, how do you tell your children something like that?
Yeah.
You can never go back from something like that, you know? So, yeah, we just went forward from there. And
my heart goes out to you because what people don't realize at that moment, you're right, you can't go back because your family ended.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And you can't know that until you've been there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So then it was just, phoning people and making arrangements and doing all those things, and they're all awful and they're all terrible and they all you just wish that you never have to pick out a casket or a funeral plot or, things that you should never have to do. Yeah, so.
Certainly not at your age.
No. We were both 35 at the time, and
so young.
Yeah. So after that, I just kind of had to pick up the pieces of everything and keep going.
Again, I can't let us go on without saying how I totally respect and admire the deep core of survival that's within you. Okay, you you've not only gone on, you've gone on to flourish with 5 beautiful children
Thank you.
and done it so beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
And more than that, you and your friend Carlin have set up a podcast that I think honors your husband.
Mm-hmm.
It honors you
Mm-hmm.
and Carlin and is making things better in our world for others.
Thank you so much for saying that. That was really the whole point behind it. You know, we kind of basically said, like, we didn't sign up for this. We didn't sign up for this life. And there are so many other people who can say that. And really what we wanted was to be able to hear stories from people who have been through hell and have been through things that you could never imagine somebody could survive, and then see them on the other side.
Yes.
You know, because I had friends who lost children. I had 2 friends who lost their children at, 4 and 5 years old. And I remember thinking to myself, like, how are you walking around, functioning, doing anything? And in my mind, I'm just like, but you see that they're still going, they're still here, they're still, and of course they have this awful, terrible trauma and burden and, pain, but they're still here. And that gave me a lot of hope when I thought about, when I was thinking about the future after he died, because I'm just like, how do I do this? How do I keep going? But you do, and you have to. And I wanted my kids, and of course, I mean, I've had so many ups and downs. Like, I'm not healed by any means.
Oh no.
But I just wanted my kids to see that we can keep going. Like, despite this, we can keep going and we can keep moving forward, and our lives are going to be hard and sad. But we need to keep going, and that's just what we're trying to do.
Joy. And there will be happiness, and there will be fun.
Yeah, and I mean, I can laugh, I can joke, I can have fun, I can do all those things, despite the pain.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, that was the whole thing that we wanted to do with the podcast, was just to be able to share. And a lot of podcasts or television shows or things like that, they talk about big stories or big headlines or things like that. For us, we just want to talk to everyday people who have been through something, because every single person has gone through something.
Yeah.
And we just talk to everyday people who have gone through something, either an accident, a loss of a child, a spouse, cancer, anything like that. And just share your story and share how you've survived it, how you are now, and they're so, like, inspirational. I mean, some of the people that we've interviewed have been through, like, catastrophic accidents or injuries, and they're incredible. Like, they just, you would think out of anybody, like, it would be valid for them to just give up, and they don't. Like, it's amazing, and it's inspiring, and it makes me feel like I'm not alone in my grief, and I can keep going, and it just like, I feel like every episode is like a mini therapy session.
Absolutely. You can take sustenance from the stories they're sharing with you.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so we just love doing it.
And that's part of why we're here, because we believe the same in sharing our stories.
Yeah.
It does show that there is light.
Yes.
And I know that, your children are, as you said, now between 13 and 6.
6, yeah.
and they're going on with their lives. Children don't have the same understanding of time that adults do. So it's really commendable for you to go to the lengths you've gone to go on with them. Because part of why I tell stories, and part of, I believe, why you do, is to help the people that maybe aren't as resilient.
Right.
People that think they can't do it. Because when you hear that somebody else can, it might give you that little bit of impetus for you to go further.
Absolutely. And to also not assume how you're going to feel if it happens to you. Because I always talk about this. I remember watching it was a movie with Sandra Bullock and her husband died. And I remember she just laid in her bed and couldn't move. And I remember thinking, like, that would be me. If this happened to me, I would be locked in my room and I would never come out. Well, that was the complete opposite of what happened to me, and you never know how you're going to react or how you're going to be or how resilient you really are until you're in that situation. So, you just can't predict
No.
how things are going to go. And, we also share these stories to help people who maybe have never been through, a tragedy or things like that, to kind of show them. And if they've got friends or people in their life who have gone through it, then they can understand the other side of it and understand how they can help and how they can make their friend feel better or, encourage them or things like that too. So it's just, there's a lot of different aspects
and
to
also
it.
for people to understand that everybody reacts differently.
Yes.
To everything.
Yes. Yeah.
There's no set of 5 steps or 4 visages or a certain emotions. It just doesn't work that way.
No, it doesn't.
Everybody's different.
Yeah. I remember my counselor telling me that grief is irrational. There's no rhyme or reason. There's no explanation to grief and why it makes you feel the way it does, or why you could be going along and having the best day and then all of a sudden, bam, there's just no explanation. And the more people understand that, the better.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And do you share stories with the kids of you and your husband and his hopes for them?
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about Dad and, his favorite movies or his favorite food or what he used to cook and things like that. And he's still very much a part of our day-to-day lives. I have only so far shared with my older 2 that he did die by suicide. I've always said that it's never going to be a secret in our family, because I feel like that just brings shame, and it makes them feel like if they're struggling, that they shouldn't reach out for help or anything like that. So for us in our family, counseling and therapy and getting help is like the number one. All my kids are in therapy. I'm in therapy. It's just like, it's a given in our house. But the younger ones are still not quite there, I think, to kind of comprehend what it all means.
Still very young.
And I'd always said, similar to, telling them that he died, once I say it, it has to be dealt with immediately.
Yes.
It can't, you know what I mean? So it's like, there's just got to be a plan. And I talk to their counselors about it and when and what the right time and things like that to communicate it with them. So I'm just kind of, with my older kids, the timing just kind of worked out where in the moment it was just the time. But I haven't really run into that yet with my younger ones. Because 6 and 9 is still
it's still very young.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you and I talked about this before, but I just want even children to be able to talk about the sometimes not good thoughts that we have about ourselves and know that it's okay.
Yes.
I want the
Yeah.
shame and the secrecy to end
Yes.
because that's how we beat this beast.
Yeah. Yeah. I talk a lot to my kids about my own mental health struggles. I have depression, I have anxiety, I take medication. I am fully open with them about those things. My oldest also struggles with depression and takes medication, and um, it's not a secret. It will never be a secret in our family. Um, I remember when my husband's dad died by suicide.
Yes.
He had counselors telling him and his brother, you know, now that you've experienced somebody dying this way, it could become an option for you. Once, and you would think it would be the opposite. You would think that if you lose somebody, you would never do that because you know what happens to the people who are left behind. But it almost becomes, you know, different where it's like, oh, okay, well, if I'm feeling that way, there's a way out. And you know what I mean? And so my children are at risk.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
and I will do everything in my power to stop this here.
Yeah.
We're
And
not
that's
going
why
forward and doing this anymore.
and that's why I want it on the table,
Absolutely.
because it's in our family.
Mm-hmm.
I lost my friend, and yet her into her life turned out to be the worst, best gift that I could be given.
Mm-hmm.
Because in as much as it became an option for me, it was an option on the table all the time.
Yes.
What she had done and how we felt became the thread that kept me in the quilt of life, if you will.
Right. Right.
So there's always those two sides, but
Yeah.
taking it out of the closet, out of the silence, out of the
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
think is critical, and I really applaud you for that with your
Oh,
children
thank you.
and yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't struggle with depression prior to
No,
him dying. So I did have a hard time kind of understand. I did struggle a lot with anxiety, but I did have a hard time really understanding it and relating to it. I mean, I never diminished it. I never made him feel, bad for feeling the way he was feeling. But um, after he died, and I struggled with depression, um, and I never had any suicidal thoughts or anything like that as at all. But I really could put myself there, and I could really get to the point where I understood, however crass this sounds, I understood the appeal.
yes, yeah, and that is not crass at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I really did understand. Yeah.
Yeah,
That way.
yeah,
That way. I really did. And so now I feel like now I can understand a little bit better.
yeah, and it gives you more empathy
Mhm.
with others when you can understand something a little more deeply.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So
So, so that we end on a more upbeat note,
yeah.
what's in the future for you and the I Didn't Sign Up for This podcast and the
Hmm.
kids?
Yeah. We just want to keep putting out episodes. We've been doing it for just over 2 years now. We have over 130 episodes. We just love talking to people and hearing their stories. And we our format is very casual. We don't do a lot of prep work because we want it to come out as naturally as we can, so that we're almost hearing it when our audience is hearing it, and we're asking the questions that our audience would want to ask.
Yeah.
And that way people can frame their story however they want. They can start it however they want and speak in their own words. And we've got interviews lined up all the way until November, and we're just going to keep on trucking. And we encourage anyone who wants to be on our podcast to reach out to us, and because every story is important, and whether you feel like you have a story to share or not, I can guarantee you that you do, and that it will resonate with somebody. And just for me and the kids, I'm just going to keep working as hard as I can to keep us afloat and keep us going and keep our mental health in check, and just live every day.
On that note, I totally agree. That's wonderful. I thank you so much, Michelle, for being my guest today.
Thank you for asking me. It's been a pleasure.
It's been wonderful for me.
Thank you.
I'm Elaine Lindsay. We will have all of Michelle's links and all of the information in the transcript of the show. And as I remind everybody every time I pop off, is make the very best of your today, every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe on your favorite service. Suicide Zen Forgiveness was brought to you by Truel Social Media, the digital integration specialists. Let them get you on page 1 in the search results.